I've got to introduce myself. My name is Kathy Bettman, Associate Professor and Deputy Dean of Counselling at the Ken Miller Institute, but I am here in my position on the research committee of the National Heads of Counselling and Psychotherapy Educators Research Committee. And it is my privilege to be interviewing today Dr. Nathan Beel. And I'm going to throw it to you, Nathan, and say, introduce yourself, because you know more about you than I do.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Nathan, and I'm a counsellor through and through from all my background, as well as I currently work for the University of Southern Queensland as a senior lecturer there, and I work for Australian College of Applied Professions as a sessional educator there, and do research in between those two positions and counselling practice as well.
The research in between is really interesting because you are so prolific in the research you do. So it's a little bit difficult, challenging to think of all the other stuff then. My goodness gracious.
Sure. I wish I was more prolific. Often I'm in a period at the moment where I'm in the middle of marking, and that sort of holds everything back. So it's like, oh, I can't wait to finish, and then I can get back into it.
Into it, yeah.
Mm.
But I loved how you said you're a counselor through and through. So was that the beginning of this journey into research? Because that's what I was going to ask you to talk about. How did you get to be so interested in research?
Sure. Look, yeah, counselling through and through is I guess, my statement around that. My undergraduate degree was, or Bachelor of Arts in Counselling, the graduate diploma of counselling, Master of Counselling, and doctorate in counselling. So all those are PhD, but the specialisation was in male-friendly counselling. So a lot of people do a psych degree and then they do the masters in counselling, or they do a social degree and masters, whereas mine was counselling all the way through. And and each in two of those qualifications in the 3-year bachelors, I actually did a research project in there. And then in the masters, I did another thesis as well. So I'd done 2 theses by that stage, and each time I did them, I really enjoyed them. I really enjoyed the process and the discovery, and I chose topics that I was really interested in. And then I wasn't that interested in doing a doctorate. I got an academic post in 2008, and I was quite happy just to be a lecturer and just to tootle on. But there's that expectation from universities that you really do need to get a doctorate. And finally, I had a head of school who was really supportive. So that's when I decided to do a PhD. And yeah, the rest is history.
So the PhD, I'm really interested about that, but I can't help remarking on the fact that you did research both in your undergrad and your master's degree, which is becoming more and more unusual, I think, as we try and fit in all the knowledge we need to have to be counselors and then do that as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, look, that's a big issue, and it's certainly a very big concern of mine, the way we're going, because the curriculum is getting more full, the expectations are ever increasing. When I was going through, often there was a lot more focus on, you learn a model, you do that really well. And it was very much around, you choose the model, which is the silver bullet for everything, and then you just apply that to everything. Whereas these days, you need to have the knowledge around each of these potential issues that clients have, all the different configurations, relationship counselling, online counselling, individual counselling, counselling with children, group counselling. So there's all these configurations as well on top of that. And so I think that, yeah, our curriculum is getting more and more full, and students typically don't want to do 6 years of study. They typically want to do the shortest pathway possible to get qualified, to get registered. And unfortunately, as the curriculum gets more full, the thing which takes the hit is the research, is from what I've seen.
So you would have been fairly well prepared to undertake your PhD, probably a lot more so than a lot of people.
Look, because I did the counselling route, so my first project, it was over I can't remember if it was a full year or a semester, but I think it's a full year project. I think they put that in there just as filler because they didn't know what else to put in there. So we didn't actually have a research methodology course. We just got plonked with a research supervisor, and guided through that. So it was still valuable, but it wasn't I guess the pure research, or it was basically I did a synthesis or a narrative review, and probably not even a review, but it was a big project on a particular topic. The next one, the master's one, we actually did a methodology subject prior to doing the research. And I was really glad I did that. We could have gone either way. We could have gone practice or research. So we're given a choice. There's two streams you could take. I chose the research one because I'd already done the 4 years prior with counselling and had done a 200-hour placement of 200 hours of practice placement. And and I was working in the field. So I thought, look, I don't feel like I need to have more practice. What I feel where my gap is at the moment is I'd like to do more research. And so hence I took that particular pathway. But yeah, that's where I only got my methodology training in the master's.
And was that a qualitative study?
Yeah.
Okay.
The methodology course, the person who taught it said, look, you guys don't need to know about quant. Just do the qualitative stuff, because the quants, if I try and give you everything, you're probably not going to retain much at all. And so let's just put you on where you're most likely to do. And I was very happy with that. I didn't really want to get into the rats and stats sort of side of things. But I didn't get this sort of the research preparation that I would have got if I'd done psych as an undergrad or honours sort of student. So it was a much more customized to counselling in terms of the qual side of it.
Yeah. Okay. But there's a lot, and it's a whole separate discussion on maybe the idea of having to do counselling as an undergrad degree and then go on to a master's in order to be able to incorporate more research into the curriculum. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, we do need to find a way, like if the counselling profession believes research is important, we actually do need to find a way to ensure there is sufficient research there, because students will typically not self-elect to do research if they can help it. Counselling students, that is. Counselling students, we're relational. We sign up to counselling degrees because we want to become practitioners first and foremost.
Yeah.
And typically because of that, they may not have a strong value or recognize the value of research unless academics actually show them and highlight that.
And yes, exactly, until they've actually done it. And then the satisfaction that one can get is absolutely huge. So you were talking about, you had your position, research came about because you realized it was important for your profession as an academic at uni. Is that right?
It was part of my motivation, actually. Is a bit selfish on my part, but I'd been in academia for a good number of years, and I was in a leadership position in a human services degree with a accredited counselling sequence in there. And so I was very happy coordinating, managing that. And some of my colleagues would come in, with 1 or 2 years of teaching experience. They'd have their doctorate and they'd get automatically promoted to senior lecturer within no time. They'd put in for a promotion, whereas I knew I could not get promoted until I'd actually got a doctorate. So it didn't matter what I did, didn't matter what size of the program I had that I had leadership for. Until I got that bit of paper, I wasn't going to. And I thought, it feels like I'm doing all this work, but it's not being recognized when other people can sort of just with so much less than what I'm actually doing. So I thought, look, if I do it, and with the Australian government, they were saying with the research scheme. So to me, I thought, well, it's free. There's an opportunity. I'll put my hand up, and so as long as I can choose a topic that really interested me, then I decided to go forward.
Actually, you've also said something that's really interesting, and I think a problem about research, that it doesn't matter how many students we teach at uni in some capacity of research. That's not counted as us doing research.
No, it's right.
Even if you supervise 100 master's students getting their research done and PhD, that's not considered you doing research. So it's got to be a whole separate activity, which is really interesting. But again, another discussion. So tell us about your PhD. What did you decide to do?
So initially, I actually had two topics. I started with one topic, which was feedback in counselling. So I'd sort of following the outcome, the common factors sort of theory around, and the importance and impact of feedback in counselling. So I thought, well, let's do some research on this and really looking at how to really enhance the quality of the feedback that we receive from clients so that we get higher quality feedback, that we can say things which is more likely to elicit negative feedback from clients, so that we can help enhance and improve our practice, as well as obviously first and foremost to enhance client outcomes with our clients. And so I basically did 12 months of that, and then I went to get confirmation, and basically the confirmation went through, and then the topic fell over. Essentially, they said, "Look, no, you can't do this research design you're planning. It's not going to work. You can't do it." And I said, "Oh my goodness, it's just 12 months. What do I do now? Do I try and reconfigure it now and start again with the methodology, or do I change topic?" So I decided to change topic, and around that period of time, I'd been getting quite a lot of referrals of males who the counsellor's saying, "We can't work with these males. They're difficult, they're problematic, and we want, can you see them?" And because I was sort of going there once a week to the service just to keep my hours up, and so it's like, I think they sort of said, "We'll hand these guys over to this guy who comes in because we're not going to lose a relationship," sort of thing, because we don't have to work with him every day, sort of thing. So, but with these clients, I discovered that when I listened to them, and I discovered that they're actually really easy to work with. They weren't these personality disorder, mean sort of guys. They were actually really hard-working clients. They were very open and very interested in change. And I had such a different experience to the description that I was given. And I thought, what's this about? Why this contrast? And one of the things each of these clients said, and there was about 3 or 4 of them, they said, "We feel like because we're a male, we were viewed differently and viewed less than." And so I think they pushed back and held their ground, and thankfully the counsellors, and they're all good counsellors. I'm not thankfully the counsellors recognised that what was happening was not working for the client, and hence a referral. But I decided, well, what is the male experience? Is there something in this? And maybe I'm doing something right with them, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why this is happening, but it would be good to be able to, I listened to these client stories, and I thought it's really important that counsellors know how to work with males who may not be easy to work with for some people. So hence I started my PhD topic change to basically male-friendly counselling. What is it? What is male-friendly counselling, and what do the experts say? It is to try and bring it all together, to try and tease out what the literature was saying was male-friendly counselling, and to try and just understand it better. So it's essentially, it was in the service of practice, but I also thought it would be something which I could afterwards deliver training on it, and help organisations, help individuals who might have been struggling with working with men and wanted to work better with men. Wow. So yeah, that was my PhD topic, and that was the one which I ended up getting confirmed in, and finished the PhD in.
I have to say, when you mentioned the other one about feedback, I thought, wow, you were so ahead of your time, because that's been something that's kind of still being researched even now, I know, by the associations.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing to think you had that idea then, and that it didn't come to fruition. But your second one was also hugely valuable, because it's not only difficult men, it's just inviting men to have counselling in the broader sense as well. So did you do semi-structured interviews? How did you do that?
So I did a PhD by publication. The first paper was a systematic literature review. So I wanted to find out, what does the experts out there say, the scholarship say about male-friendly counselling, and what are the themes within that? And within that, I really found that the themes were really around, at the end of the day, I discovered it's just multicultural counselling. It's the culture of masculinity, and particularly a lot of the literature is focused on traditional masculinity, so traditional norms that men have. And really the findings were really that therapy as normal is actually not a good fit for traditional masculine norms. And if you do therapy as normal with traditional guys who are traditionally masculine, it actually that will actually trigger resistance. It'll actually, you're violating, it's culturally insensitive to work that way. But what often happens is therapists do what they do, and doesn't these guys put the resistance up, and then they blame the guy. They think this guy's just problematic. But it's not the problematic guy necessarily, it's the problematic process that's it's just not culturally fitting for the client.
Okay, so that was your first paper, and the second paper?
So the second paper, I did interviews with, I looked up Google and to try and look up male-friendly counsellors in Australia to find those therapists who advertise themselves as being focused primarily on male counselling men, and found a few of them, and then interviewed them, and to try and find what's the themes for. I know what the international literature says. I want to hear what counsellors' experiences are who think that who promote themselves as being specialists in this area. So yeah, I did some interviews and then published a paper on those findings, and also published another one in an Australian journal, the Australian Counselling Research Journal, for the third one. So those are my three papers essentially.
Wow. Okay, but I have to smile because when you mention Google, I just think of you and how up to AI you are and all these things. And it started back there and you've just kind of continued.
Yes,
We all kind of turn to you to say, Nathan, what's happening?
That's right. I'm an early adopter when it comes to technology as much as possible.
You really, really are. And look, which actually is a good entry point, because I'm really conscious of the fact that you're somebody that likes moving forward and not sticking in the same old place. And I know how interested you are in research and how proactive, not just active, proactive you are in it. So can you talk a little bit about what's your ongoing interest in it all about? Like, why do you now see research as being so important to counselling?
Sure. Look, to me, I think research there's a number of strands to this, and I guess probably part of my evolution into recognizing the importance of research for the counselling profession as a whole is that when myself and a colleague of mine did a desktop review of academic staff who teach counselling in accredited counselling degrees. And we did a desktop review, so I went through staffing profiles of a number of universities, a number of private institutions who offered Masters of Counselling, Bachelor of Counselling, and which were accredited programs or courses that is most often they're called. And what we discovered is the majority of staff were not counsellors. They did not have a background in counselling. They were psychologists, most of them. And some staffing profiles, they had no counsellors at all on staff. They were entirely taught by psychologists and social workers. And it raised a big question for me because as a counselling lecturer, students would often tell me how they knew counselling lecturers. They could feel the difference. They sensed this different philosophy behind what we taught to what they got taught by their lecturers from other professions. Who is socialising our students to become counsellors, and do they understand what counselling is about? And if they're not socialised into our profession, if they're socialised into a different profession, but they're also not members of our profession either, yet they're preparing people for our profession. So, and they obviously think they can do it, and they often do a very good job of it. But the question is, this is a real concern for me. So you take a few steps back and say, why is this happening? Well, one issue is because our training standards didn't actually protect our profession and sort of encourage or create the protection which sort of said, look, at least X number of staff or percentage of staff need to be counsellors, counselling qualified, counselling trained, and the rest of it. There has been some change in one of the professionals' training standards. Now, why would universities want to get around that? And this comes back to the research, is because they want to get the best person for the job. Now, who are the best people for the job in universities? And I won't speak for private institutions because private institutions are a little bit different. They tend to value teaching more than universities do. Okay, so they don't have such a big interest in research as much as universities do. But universities prize research even more so in some ways than teaching. And so if you've got a choice, you've got 10 people applying for the job, You've got 5 counsellors. Most of them will have up to master's level of qualification, maybe 1 or 2 publications, but they'll generally be in trade journals, not research journals, but trade journals, which is like the what practitioners read, not what scholars read. So you got them who've got very good counselling qualifications, generally very little teaching, no PhD, master of counselling, and maybe 1 or 2 things, but often all you've got is a bunch of promises. Yes, I want to publish, and I think I'm very good at it, but they actually got no track record, right? Versus the other 5 who are PhD psychologists or social workers, and they've got publications as well, and they've got experience, and they can teach across multiple disciplines. They can teach psychology and counselling. So you've got more diversity. So they make, from a university perspective, you can say, why would you hire someone with a master's, and you can hire PhDs in psychology, and who can supervise psychologists and counsellors, who can, so it just made counsellor look like a really, go for a secondary sort of person compared to someone who's got the whole deal. And to me, so the question is, okay, well, what's the next step with that? If counsellors are going to, first of all, we need to have training standards that actually say, the counselling qualification and membership is actually more important. That's a core essential characteristic. It's not an optional. Whereas unfortunately, up until now, the training standards have typically treated counsellors as optional in the socialisation of counsellors. So I'm probably getting a bit political here, but I hope you don't mind.
I think this is a place where we should be getting political so that people are able to have a discussion.
Yeah. And to me, the concern is that it wasn't that we don't appreciate people from other professions teaching in the counselling, because that's actually, to me, I think that cross-disciplinary stuff is actually a good thing. But when you've only got 1 counselling staff member and 5 from another profession, and that 1 counselling staff member can get outvoted on counselling matters from within their own discipline, from within their own sort of team, to me, it's the skew of power goes, it's problematic. Plus, obviously, the students need socialising, and I think counsellors are the best people to socialise counselling students. So anyway, I think that the question becomes, okay, how do we so if the profession is not protecting the education of counselling within the universities, the next best thing we need to do is actually make sure that we've got a pipeline of counsellors coming through who actually got PhDs. And this is where it becomes problematic, because what's the pathway to a PhD in counselling? Okay, so if you do a 3-year Bachelor of Counselling, then you probably won't get much research experience at all. There's not a 4th-year honours degree in counselling in most places. Maybe there's one out there somewhere, but I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any. So you don't get the research thing there. If you go into the masters, as you highlighted before, the masters, over time, the research projects are being trimmed out of them, and they get a methodology course or subject, but there's not actually getting a research project to actually whet their appetite. Plus, they're typically the people they're looking up to. You've got these 2 ranks of people. You've got their educators who are not doctoral trained most of the time, who are counsellors, and then you've got the people, the more high status people, which are the psychologists. So you think, well, obviously the research side, that belongs to them. It doesn't belong to us as counsellors. We can't do it. Okay. Whereas I think when they can see lecturers like yourself, Kathy, who are PhDs in counselling, and they're in the profession, it gives students an aspiration. They say, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can. Whereas if you've got whole lot of lecturers who are counsellors, who are master in counselling trained without the research background, they're not going to feel confident about research. And in fact, there are some streams of lecturers out there who actually don't like research and don't, they poo-hoo research because it's probably, they just don't have enough exposure to it in that sort of sense. So it's like, so they also don't create a culture of research where research is highly valued. So to me, I think we need to create more space in academic pathways so that students have a clear journey, that there are people who they can look up to and admire and say, hey, maybe I can be like this person.
Can I just ask you, and it might be a silly question, but I was thinking about it. You made the point that counsellors very much come into this profession because they want the skill, they want to sit and talk to people and work with people. They're not really coming into it because they want to be academics.
Yeah.
You also made the point, maybe a little bit indirectly, but my understanding, the reason that they even go for masters these days is because that has become a training requirement for associations, really. do associations or bodies that put out training requirements, and next year is going to be a big thing with national training requirements. Do you think it would be necessary for them to include research as part of the necessary training requirements, or do we just go along respecting perhaps that people really want to be practitioners rather than go that route as well?
Yeah, look, I think on journeys that people, if they're not exposed to stuff, they're not going to know if they like it or not. So if we don't have a project in there, if they've got no choice in their training, they've got no opportunity for a project, then they're not going to know if they like it or not. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges if you leave it out. I'm fully aware of we're bringing at so much space, if you got that much space and you got to take something out to put a research project in nowadays, that's a problem because again, we've only got a very limited space. So in some ways, I don't think within a master's, within a 2-year master, I don't think we've got space to do full preparation. Even with a Master of Counselling, I don't think it's enough to really fully qualify somebody who may not have come through social work or psychology before. I think that, so if they do extend from one of those early disciplines, yes, they've got all this background knowledge, but if someone comes in without those, it's a very small exposure. And even if they've got those, if they've done a psych, say, background, they've done so little therapy in that space anyway. So they might have done lots of, general sort of human development and behavior sort of science part of it. But so it's what sort of volume of learning to really prepare someone to be a counsellor, as well as to give them sufficient research training as well. It's hard to know. To me, I think one potential solution is to have 2 streams. So at the University of Southern Queensland, where I teach, we've got 2 streams. We've got the full research project as part of one version of a core, or the other version of a core is they have a cut down version. So it's like they just do a scoping project sort of thing. So it's like the light version of research. But what that does, it means those who have that capacity, we tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, we think you should consider this because we think you might have potential for an academic career if that's the direction you wanted to go, or towards a doctorate if you're interested in that. So those who are gifted and who want to take that route, they can start funneling off, and those who just want to know how to do it in a basic sense, they take that route. And that's fine because not everybody's going to want to, and not everyone's going to enjoy research. Okay, so but if there's no options, then there's no, they don't even realize that there's a journey available for them.
Okay. So you spoke with some passion about your desire or your concerns about the culture of the academic world in terms of counselling and having counselling psychologists there doing the job. Is that then filtering into the research that you are doing?
I have been doing some and preparing some papers and doing some projects at the moment where we're talking counsellors, we're talking to students, we've interviewed students, and it's interesting the data that we're seeing, particularly the ones with the students who have come from I'm preparing a paper at the moment where students have come from psychology into counselling. And so they've done their 3-year or 4-year degree in psych, and they come into a Master of Counselling. And because one of the big messages was whenever we'd sort of challenge when psychologists were being assigned to teach counselling, we'd sort of challenge that with our bosses. The answer was, look, we're all alike anyway. We're all the same. Now, when we've actually done this qualitative research interviewing students, and they're actually saying no, they are like chalk and cheese. They are not equivalent. They teach almost the exact opposite to the other one. So we're looking at getting those couple of papers published in that space. But it's really important because as our profession, I think the profession needs to also ask itself, who are we? Because other professions counsel as well. And how are we unique and how are we different? And we're not just a bunch of, the counselling degree is not just teaching a bunch of counselling skills and theories. We actually have our own identity and our own values. And what are those values? So one of the research we're actually conducting at the moment, collecting data for, is actually asking counsellors what's important. What are counsellors' values within the counselling profession? differentiates us from other professions who also counsel. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that data and seeing how they perceive the differences, where they perceive the boundaries are. Because if we can't define ourselves, I think that's really problematic. If anybody can come in and teach counselling, and anybody can teach counselling, and everybody can teach it well, but if we have our own identity, so we can say, then we can communicate that to the public and to employers as to, if the employers or the public, why should I choose a counsellor, not a psychologist? Well, some people will probably find a counsellor better in some areas. Some people will prefer the psychologist in other areas. We're both valuable professions, but I think it gives people a more informed choice as to who they're getting and what, and then they'll know the reasons why they're choosing a counsellor or a psychologist or a social worker. There's different flavors, offer the very similar activities, but we may do it slightly differently.
Yeah. That in itself can bring on a heap of other political questions, because who is a counsellor, and where do you fit the other, the psychotherapists, the couple and family therapists, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander healing practices, and all these things. So how do you fit that into this identity, into this training, into universities? So I guess we're not short of research projects in that
Yeah.
area.
Look, I think that we're so undefined at the moment, and because PACFA and I think ACA as well, we've sort of been that broad school. We accept everybody in there, which have done counsel, and diversity has always been our strength. We've always said, come in. We're not going to become model focused where we sort of say this model is the only model and this is all the others are sort of less than. We embrace all the different sort of shapes and shades and modalities of all sorts of different things. And that's been, I think, our strength. And we've actually done pretty well, even though there's been those internal debates between psychotherapy and counseling. Overall, we've done pretty well, I think. But the challenge of that is when you've got other professions who, I can summarize psychology in a couple of words, scientist practitioner, that captures the essence of that profession. Social justice, that captures the essence of social work. What's counseling? What captures the real essence of who we are, what we're about? Yes, you could sort of say counseling, but other professions counsel too, and we can't say we do it any better or worse than them. So what's our core, what's our heart of what we do? And I think when you're sort of saying about psychotherapy and Indigenous training practitioners and sort of couple therapists, relationship counsellors, to me, I think there are some core things that when you talk to counsellors, like we're speaking to each other, we're speaking to the same, these are my people. There's different ways things we value, and I think we've got to sense it, but I don't think we've articulated it very well. But I think that was one of the things when the US, because they had all these different counselling associations all around there trying to bring a common sense of identity and organisation and structure. And one of the key things they found was, I think their very first thing, which helped them to bring that unity across the profession, was this sense of core identity. They had a core identity as to who they were and what they were about, and they could say it quite precisely. We haven't done that in Australia yet, and in some ways, I think some people aren't terribly interested in it. But I think this is a really core thing as to if you've got no boundaries, sure, we're sort of very inflexible. We're flexible, inclusive, but we also need to have some really clear boundaries, and that's identity and a shared, something which we can say as an ACA or as a PACFA member. We are a counsellor. This is what this means, whether we're ACA or PACFA, but we share a common spirit, a common essence, and I think that's I think we all do intuitively know something, share something. We just haven't been able to articulate that carefully as a profession, which means if we can't, with these new minimum training standards coming in, it could be that, well, if we lack a clear identity and just essence as to what our core philosophies are, then it risks the government or some other outside agency injecting that into it, or offering us one, and we just accepting it to get the money, to get the funding. And to me, again, I think that's just the risk that we take if we're not really clearly defined.
Okay. I guess I've asked all the questions that I had thought of. Is there anything that you feel I should have asked that I haven't asked that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Look, I just want to highlight one thing, and this comes back down to the bigger picture at the moment, I guess the political side, which is what's driving the National Heads Research Subcommittee, is really within academia at the moment. A lot of the universities, particularly, are basically sort of saying you need to publish in these really highly ranked journals, which is problematic for counselling lecturers and counselling academics because our Australian journals are actually unranked. They have no ranking, so when we publish in them, our universities will say, sorry, we're not going to count that towards your workload. You're doing that in your own time, which basically sucks a whole lot of the academic energy away from that because academics are already extremely busy themselves. So we're basically forced to, if we want to tick the boxes for our bosses, we need to publish outside of our profession. And our profession needs research. It needs to help establish ourselves as, we're a legitimate, credible profession. But if we're not actually publishing our own research, it sort of raises, in our own profession, it raises questions. So to me, it's we have this issue where some of the questions I've got is how do we get our journals ranked? But even when they get ranked, they're still going to be far way off the top journals because, it takes years and years and years. I know PACFA's got a research committee. I'm not sure if ACA has got a research committee, but I think it's really important as a profession that we have some way of ensuring that we've got a pipeline of people coming through into getting their doctorates. So for anyone listening today, counsellors, if you're academically inclined, if you're a student and you're academically inclined, reach out to an academic in a local institute which teaches in counselling and have a conversation with them and see if you can find a pathway through to a doctorate. You can do it part-time, and there's often, because there's so few counselling academics out there with doctorates, it's, you've got the world at your feet. Counselling educators or education institutions do want to hire doctorates in counselling when they're available, but there's just so few available. It's often between that or someone with a master's. So, but I think we do have we need to look at the pipeline of people coming through to ensure that we're looking after and creating where people can get doctorates in counselling or PhDs, as we call them, and then move into academia so that we can be socialised in the next generation from people who are actually socialised themselves as counsellors. And that's not to diminish the other academics who come from different disciplines. I think there's definitely room for both. It's just that we need to have more of our own homegrown academics, and we need to somehow find solutions so that universities will value research that counsellors do and support our academics who are in academia, how to actually support them to get promoted and to get publications. And these are a lot of the questions we've been asking within our research subcommittee as well, is how do we strategically build the capacity of counselling research in Australia so we can support students, we can support academic staff, we can support the profession as a whole to enhance our credibility and our reputation, as well as our client care.
And therein lies some problems too, like money. I think money is a lot of the problem of trying to get our journals, up there.
Absolutely.
That's a huge problem. And the other thing is that, like you were talking about, the very point you made about, who's teaching at universities, the fact that there are so few counselling supervisors, that it actually is quite hard to find a counselling supervisor. Yeah. And very often you have to, which is also really good, and it's again not knocking, but you very often have to have supervisors in other disciplines as well. So you're really lucky if you can get, the full quota of counselling supervision. So
yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that for me, because I didn't have any counsellors who were my supervisors, and I didn't really see that as problematic in any sense because I already had my identity as a counsellor, and so this was about the Teach Me research, and people outside, I knew the content, or I was learning the content. They were helping with the methodology side, and what better people to do than psychologists who know methodology really well. Yeah. So to me, I'm less concerned around that. I'm more concerned that it's the pipeline of people coming through and entering into doctoral programs so that they can get the support. Because once we get that critical mass, it's the same with the higher education. Once they moved a lot of the counselling into higher education, the only people who could teach it were psychologists, social workers, and those, because there wasn't much in the counselling training prior to that in terms of the higher education. So it's like you've got to start somewhere, and this is why the counselling associations didn't have minimum numbers for counselling trained people because we just didn't have the availability of people to be able to do that. We just had more students, but not enough people from the counselling background. But the problem with that was when I went to once we started to develop people, if you don't start setting some minimum bars, institutes have nothing to incentivize them to actually help the pipeline come through. So they'll just say, well, we have to worry about training counsellors to become PhDs because your profession doesn't require it. So why should we? Whereas once the profession requires it, then that incentivizes the universities to start looking at this pipeline question as well. And they take that on board. And obviously you don't want to put the bar so high that no one can meet accreditation. Otherwise you lose all your institutions and then that becomes problematic in itself. But if they continue increasing the bar bit by bit to incentivize universities to ensure they've got sufficient proportions of people who are counselling trained, or at least on the pathway they're enrolled into PhD programs and doing the lecturing as well, then I think to me, all the changes we're looking at, they have to be incremental. We can't, we're not in the position, we just don't have the capacity to do massive changes. But as long as we're moving in the right direction, I think that in 5 years' time, our future selves will look back and thank us very much for the steps we're taking today, these small steps, which include doing these videos, what you're doing. This is part of it to try and raise awareness and culture and all this. Plus, we're also, I think our next step in our committee is around building some communities of practice for counselling researchers. Which again, just small things which can help to strengthen the morale and to strengthen the knowledge and share the knowledge around some of what we're learning. And we'll keep on looking at other ideas as well as to how to actually build capacity. Just through our conversations.
I take away that it's almost a very visual metaphor of a pipeline that has to be built and little steps. But it does seem ironic in a way that we're wanting to get our profession more concreted into academia, and yet we need the psychologists to help us to get there.
Yeah. Oh, look,
which is cool. That's fine. Yeah.
Look, psychologists and social workers, they were the backbone of PACFA. They've really helped our profession. So probably a lot of our committees in the early days were probably outnumbered by psychologists, social workers who had a dream around because they knew there's something different about this group of people, this profession. And so it's really important that we don't marginalize this. To me, it's about trying to get the balance right. We're just trying to,
totally agree. Because I grew up in social work environments, and I think the social justice, which you defined earlier, was absolutely required in our counselling profession.
Yeah.
And so it is harnessing all the strengths and bringing it together for our own identity.
Yeah, we don't want to lose our diversity. So it's like we want to stay inclusive as a profession, in my view, as well as we need to sort of say, here's what we are, that we can define ourselves, and that there's clear boundaries between those who are part of our profession, those who aren't part of our profession, and we can still interact and have that interprofessional connection. And but it's just really around ensuring that, do we know who we are first and foremost? Because the issue of identity is not just an Australian counselling issue. This is an issue internationally with Australia, with counselling, because we are a profession built around a skill set or an activity essentially. So, and this activity is not unique to us. So we're not, there's nothing new about what we're doing. It's shared, it's been with pastors, it's been with psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. So we don't own it. We just identify more strongly and closely around it, but we also have a flavor. We create a flavor because we don't have all these other forces shaping all these other agendas shaping us. We're just, so we can just really focus in on the flavor of counselling. But at the moment, I think especially with going through Medicare and the governments, and also employability, because there's also discourse in the workplace and what makes someone counsellors hireable. So we've got the employers who are saying, we need you to do more case management, we need you to do more of this or more of that, more psychoeducation. So we need to think about the question of employability, the question of funding. So singing to the funders. So they go for the medical model sort of models often, or associated like with pathology and diagnosis and that type of thing. So we've got those forces shaping us, and we've got to be really careful. And then we've got our trainers who shape us too. And when I can always tell when I walk into into a subject which has been written by psychologists, it's very, very different to the subjects written by counsellors. So it's like
Absolutely.
we've got to work out who are we, and it's not about that we become this sheltered, cloistered thing that we can't do anything, we can't work within a medical model, we can't work in this. No, but we need to know our core first of all, and then that core is going to flavour. So if we do work in a hospital, if we do work with mentally ill people within a mental health system, that they will know the counsellor. There'll be an essence about the counsellor. They will know, even though we might be doing the same practice that other professions are doing as well. Okay, so to me, I think that, and our students, they tell us, they say, wow, it is, we just get such a different essence from you guys. It's such a, and I've got an idea of what it is, but I want to wait for the data. But my suspicion will be it's probably really client-centered. There's probably a whole lot of things around this, which is really uniquely counselling. And yes, we're very big into professionalism like psychs are. And yes, psychs are also into the therapeutic relationship. So we don't have, but I think the emphasis we place on certain things will be more in some areas than other areas, and other professions will have it more in some areas and less in other areas, but there'll be more overlap, but there'll still be a difference which people can sense and know. And to me, I'm really excited to try and really hopefully get that in publication at some point, once we find out where are the boundaries. And it just can't be on membership, because we've done the membership thing for too long now. And the two professional bodies and the people I talk to, they're sick and tired of the divided discourse, and that sort of sense of we want to get above that, transcend that to the essence of the counselling professional in Australia, regardless of whether ACA or PACFA or another association out there. And to me, I think this is a key part of that story.
Wow. What can I say? Just want to thank you so, so very much, Nathan, for sharing your passion and your wisdom, and for all you're doing for counselling and for counselling research, not only on the committee, but also you in your own right. So thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing it with us.